crossed the minds of many throughout history. It is frustrating to witness policies that defy logic, individuals who refuse to acknowledge simple truths, and entire societies swayed by falsehoods. We see it happen in personal relationships, workplaces, and, most disturbingly, on a national and global scale. The troubling part is not just that these issues exist, but that they continue to repeat across generations. Why does this happen? What conditions create such widespread ignorance? And most importantly, is there anything we can do to stop it? These are questions worth exploring, because they don't just shape the past, they influence the future. The way people interact with truth, power, and manipulation determines the course of history. If we ignore this pattern, we risk becoming part of the very system that allows ignorance to thrive. The cycle will repeat, unless we understand its mechanisms and actively work to counter them. Recognizing the root cause of why people so often refuse to see what is right in front of them is the first step in breaking free from this self-destructive loop. A man who deeply analyzed this phenomenon was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A theologian, pastor, and member of the resistance against the Nazi regime, he witnessed firsthand how masses could be manipulated into supporting evil. In 1943, he was imprisoned for his role in resisting Hitler's government. As he sat in confinement, stripped of his freedom, yet free to reflect, he asked himself how a nation once celebrated for its intellectual achievements could fall into the hands of tyranny and moral blindness. Germany had produced some of the greatest philosophers, writers, and scientists the world had known. How then did it become a society where millions looked the other way as their neighbors were persecuted? Bonhoeffer realized that the issue was deeper than mere ignorance. It wasn't simply about a lack of knowledge, but a deliberate refusal to think critically. People had surrendered their ability to question authority, allowing propaganda and mass influence to dictate their beliefs. He saw how power didn't just corrupt those who held it, it also diminished the reasoning ability of those who followed it blindly. His reflections led him to a profound realization. The real danger wasn't just wickedness, but stupidity. Not stupidity in the sense of low intelligence, but rather a mental laziness that made individuals susceptible to manipulation. This insight remains chillingly relevant today. If you believe critical thinking is the key to overcoming ignorance, type "think for yourself" in the comments. Let's stand for truth and independent thought in a world where manipulation thrives. Although Bonhoeffer lived in a time of war, the patterns he observed are still evident in our world. Misinformation, blind loyalty to charismatic figures, and the dismissal of inconvenient truths are more widespread than ever. We see it in political debates where people cling to ideologies despite overwhelming evidence that contradicts them. Social media amplifies this phenomenon, making it easier than ever for falsehoods to spread unchecked. Lies, half-truths, and misleading narratives are carefully crafted to manipulate public perception. Just as in Bonhoeffer's time, many choose comfort over truth, security over responsibility, and conformity over independent thinking. It is no longer just governments that wield disinformation as a weapon. Corporations, influencers, and even everyday individuals contribute to the spread of ignorance. The ease with which people reject facts, dismiss evidence, and attack those who challenge them is alarming. But Bonhoeffer's observations remind us that this isn't just a modern issue. It is a fundamental weakness in human nature that has always existed. Recognizing it is the first step toward resisting it. His words are more than a historical reflection. They are a call to action. If we are not careful, we may find ourselves repeating the same mistakes, falling prey to the same traps, and watching history repeat itself in different forms. So, what exactly did Bonhoeffer mean when he spoke about stupidity? Through his reflections in prison, he developed a theory that remains one of the most insightful explanations of mass ignorance. He argued that stupidity is not merely a lack of knowledge, but a mental condition reinforced by social structures. It is not necessarily found in the uneducated, nor does it correlate with intelligence. Rather, stupidity arises when people allow external forces to think for them. This is why even highly intelligent individuals can become deeply foolish in the right circumstances. Stupidity thrives in environments where critical thinking is discouraged, where authority is absolute, and where questioning the norm is met with punishment. It becomes especially dangerous when paired with power. The more power one holds, the less they feel the need to question their beliefs, and the more likely they are to dismiss alternative viewpoints. Stupidity flourishes not in isolation but in groups, where peer pressure and conformity reinforce mindless obedience. When individuals stop analyzing information for themselves, they become easy prey for manipulation. This is why propaganda is so effective. People do not need to be forced into submission if they can be convinced to accept a false reality willingly. The terrifying part is that those who fall into this state rarely recognize it. They believe they are making independent choices, when, in reality, they are simply echoing the messages they have been fed. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Bonhoeffer's theory is that stupidity is often more dangerous than malice. An evil person can be confronted, debated, or even resisted because they act with intention. But a foolish person, convinced of their own righteousness, is far harder to reach. They are immune to logic, unwilling to question their beliefs, and resistant to evidence that contradicts their view. This is why arguments based on reason often fail. You cannot persuade someone to think critically if they have already surrendered that ability. Worse still, the foolish often become the loudest voices in a society, drowning out those who see the truth but lack the numbers to be heard. This is why ignorance can be weaponized so effectively by those in power. By controlling what people see, hear, and believe, leaders can maintain control without needing force. The battle against stupidity is not just an intellectual one, but a moral one. It requires individuals to take responsibility for their own thinking, to resist the urge to follow the crowd, and to have the courage to question narratives, even when it is unpopular. Bonhoeffer's insights remain a stark warning that stupidity is not a harmless flaw. It is a powerful force that shapes societies, determines the fate of nations, and, if left unchecked, can lead to humanity's downfall. The question is, will we recognize it in time to stop it? In his well-known letters from prison, Dietrich Bonhoeffer made a striking argument. Stupidity is a far greater threat to goodness than evil itself. While evil can be confronted, exposed, and even resisted, stupidity presents a more insidious challenge. No amount of reasoning, debate, or force seems to have an impact on it. Stupidity thrives because it is immune to logic. It does not argue, it simply exists, reinforcing itself through blind belief and social pressure. Bonhoeffer went further, pointing out that stupidity becomes especially dangerous when it merges with power. He observed that individuals, when placed within groups or under the influence of authoritarian figures, lose their ability to think critically. The sense of security that comes from belonging to a group often leads people to surrender personal responsibility. They no longer see themselves as accountable for their choices, believing instead that the group or its leaders dictate their actions. This explains why even intelligent individuals can support irrational or destructive decisions in oppressive systems. Stupidity is not an accident in these environments, it is actively cultivated. When obedience and conformity are rewarded, questioning authority becomes dangerous, and soon, people prefer ignorance over the discomfort of independent thought. This is why dictatorships and manipulative institutions rely not only on fear, but also on the suppression of critical thinking. The less people question, the easier it is to maintain control. Bonhoeffer's reflections on stupidity align with long-standing philosophical debates. Since ancient times, thinkers have recognized that humans are inherently social creatures, and paradoxically, this very sociability contributes to stupidity. It is not merely an individual failing, but a collective phenomenon. One person acting foolishly may cause little harm, but when an entire society embraces foolishness, the results can be catastrophic. Human nature, despite all technological advancements, has remained largely unchanged over thousands of years. Many of our instincts, shaped by evolution, still govern our behavior today. One of the most persistent instincts is the tendency to follow the crowd. This trait originally helped early humans survive by sticking with a tribe, but in the modern world it often backfires. Instead of relying on independent judgment, people assume that if the majority believes something, it must be correct. This assumption is deeply flawed, as history has shown time and time again. Mass delusions, destructive ideologies, and poor decision-making on a societal level often stem from the unchecked power of herd mentality. If you believe in questioning everything and thinking for yourself, type "I choose wisdom" in the comments. Let's stand for independent thought in a world that rewards blind obedience. A powerful experiment that illustrates this phenomenon was conducted in 1951 by psychologist Solomon Asch. His now famous study on social conformity sought to uncover the extent to which individuals would go along with a group, even when the group was clearly wrong. Participants were placed in a room with several others, some of whom were secretly working with the experimenter. They were given a simple visual task, comparing the lengths of lines and identifying the correct match. However, the Confederates deliberately gave incorrect answers to see whether the real participants would conform to the group's judgment, even when it was obviously incorrect. If you've found this discussion valuable so far, take a moment to support critical thinking, like this video, and comment "I choose truth" below. Your voice matters, and so does your ability to think for yourself. Now, let's dive deeper into what makes this experiment so crucial in understanding how stupidity spreads and why Bonhoeffer's insights are more relevant than ever. The results of Ash's study were astonishing. About 75% of participants conformed to the group at least once, despite knowing that the answer was wrong. On average, nearly a third consistently went along with the incorrect majority. This simple yet profound experiment confirmed what Bonhoeffer described decades earlier. People often abandon their own judgment to avoid conflict, embarrassment, or social rejection. Even when they recognize the truth, they silence themselves for the sake of belonging. The implications are vast. If peer pressure can influence people's answers to something as objective as line lengths, imagine how much stronger the effect is in real-world situations involving politics, morality, and social beliefs. This is exactly how manipulative leaders and institutions maintain control. They do not need to convince people through force alone, they only need to create an environment where questioning is discouraged and conformity feels safe. The mind becomes trapped, and soon stupidity is no longer just a personal failing, but a societal epidemic. Understanding this is the first step in breaking free. The world does not change when everyone follows blindly. It changes when people dare to think for themselves. The challenge is clear. Will we recognize the dangers of conformity and choose courage over comfort, or will we allow stupidity to dictate the future? The choice, as always, is ours. While Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity explains how it spreads and takes root in societies, his work did not stop at mere observation. He also sought to understand how it could be resisted. He recognized that stupidity could not simply be erased through education or logical arguments alone. In fact, reason often fails when confronted with deeply ingrained ignorance. Instead, Bonhoeffer believed that breaking the cycle of stupidity requires something more profound: courage, personal responsibility, and independent thinking. The question is, in a world overflowing with misinformation, manipulation, and mass influence, how can we apply these principles? How do we, as individuals, combat stupidity when it seems to be everywhere? The first step is to develop and nurture critical thinking, both within yourself and in those around you. This means questioning everything before accepting it as truth. Before sharing an article, believing a claim, or adopting an idea, take a moment to verify it. Seek reliable sources, cross-check facts, and resist the urge to accept something just because it aligns with what you already believe. The digital age makes spreading falsehoods effortless, but it also provides the tools to uncover the truth. The second step is embracing personal responsibility. Every decision you make, what you believe, what you support, and what you ignore, has consequences. Refuse to be controlled by peer pressure or the loudest voices in the room. Stand for what is right, even when it's unpopular. History has repeatedly shown that true change does not come from those who follow the crowd, but from those who dare to challenge it. This requires courage, but courage is precisely what is needed to disrupt cycles of ignorance. It is easy to remain silent, to let others dictate the narrative, but silence enables stupidity to thrive. Responsibility means acknowledging that passivity is a choice, and every choice shapes the world we live in. If you refuse to be controlled by the majority and choose to stand for truth, type "I will think for myself" in the comments. Let's make a difference together. The third key principle is independent thinking. Do not blindly follow authority figures, social trends, or popular opinions without scrutiny. Just because something is widely accepted does not mean it is correct. True independence comes from the ability to think beyond societal norms, to see beyond propaganda, and to question narratives, even when doing so is uncomfortable. Bonhoeffer understood that breaking free from stupidity is no easy task. It requires effort, self-awareness, and the willingness to challenge even your own beliefs. But he also believed that every person has the capacity to resist ignorance and manipulation by embracing critical thought, taking responsibility, and acting with conviction. The real question is, will you be part of the change or a silent observer? If you're ready to take a stand, share this message with others who need to hear it. Let's spark a movement of awareness, courage, and truth. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's start the conversation. See you next time.